Hi, good afternoon, everyone. So glad you're here. Welcome. Feel free to keep eating and finish the lunch, tasty lunch. Please take care of us. So my name is Tom Jacobs. I work for Mid-America Regional Council and thrilled to welcome you to today's workshop on riparian restoration. We conceived of this really as a series of events. I think there are 6 in total. We're doing 2 for planners and decision makers, starting today with Steve and Logan, who I'll introduce in a minute, and another in the winter time where we'll look at some case studies from Cincinnati and perhaps Springfield. And so we're really looking forward to those. And at the same time, we're hosting, I think, 4 different events for contractors that are more field oriented and trying to get folks tuned into the practice of riparian restoration. And so that work is coupled with the work of Heartland Conservation Alliance that Logan Healy will be sharing more about later. And so we wanted to convene this series because we've got the hypothesis that riparian restoration is really some of the low-hanging fruit of the practice of watershed management, stormwater management, and urban resilience. And there's just an incredible literature to back this up. That we had studies done by Kansas State University on the Blue River some years ago, and they demonstrated that riparian restoration throughout that watershed reduced peak flood flows under a whole range of precipitation events. And we know that we think about riparian restoration, not only will it confer more resilience as we expect more intense rainfall, more frequent large events, longer duration of those events as they might stack up over multiple days. Not only will it confer resilience, but there's just 100 other reasons to think about doing this, right? We know that it improves water quality and air quality and reduces urban heat islands. It creates habitat. It just does all the things that we all aspire to do, right? There's this long list of policy goals that are embedded in virtually all of our local and regional plans. And riparian restoration is one of the main ways that we can help achieve those goals. But we haven't made a whole lot of, we haven't advanced a whole lot on this topic over the years. Some years back, I'm going to say 15 years or so ago, there was a wave of local communities adopting stream setback ordinances. I think we have about 14 communities that have adopted those sorts of zoning regulations or administrative regulations. We estimated it at the time that restricted development, or in some level protected, some 90,000 riparian acres around our metro. But it turns out you only maximize or optimize the water quality and flood risk and habitat benefits if we actively manage these landscapes. And we've kind of pulled up short on that. And so this workshop series is really to make the case for why this is important and how we can do it. I think we want to demystify the practice of environmental stewardship and ecosystem restoration. My sense is around the community, there's a little bit of trepidation around this topic. We're not really sure how to do it. Our organizations aren't set up oftentimes to engage in active land management and stewardship activities. Perhaps the funding isn't there. Perhaps the staff aren't trained up to know exactly what to do and how to do it. And so there's all these things in the way. And another key one, frankly, is all of our cities are organized around satisfying MS4 permits. And yet those permits themselves don't focus on stewardship and management of receiving waterways. They're all about minimizing non-point source pollution, principally into our waterways, but they stop there and they don't talk about what's the quality, the dynamic, the health of our area waterways. And so I would add that as on a regional basis, we have somewhere on the order of 7,200 lineal miles of creeks, streams, and rivers. And I forget what average buffer zone I applied to make this calculation, but I came up with about 225,000 riparian acres in the metro. Of that, Most of it's in private ownership, but a not too small portion is in public ownership, which really creates an initial opportunity to make progress. And in fact, I'm aware of any number of projects around the community where things have been done with tremendous success. And so really what I'm trying to do in this whole series is to say, can we make sure that we understand the need, the opportunity, what's in the way, and figure out how can we overcome the barriers to start implementing riparian restoration projects at ever larger scale, so we can begin to see watershed-wide impacts for problems that we know we need to address in the future. So that's what we're trying to do here. And by way of opportunities in front of us, I know many of you may be aware that we are on the final stretches of adopting APWA 5600, the regional stormwater engineering standards. And there's been quite a discussion in that process about including stream buffers and managing those stream buffers with vegetative buffers or trees or whatnot to help attenuate flows and improve water quality. And once that's adopted and we begin to implement that on a regional basis, that work should go hand in hand with trying to think then for the site level, how are we controlling stormwater to how is it adding up over a watershed basis so we can achieve these large scale goals that we're talking about. There's a lot of work in our community that we have a longstanding ethic of stewardship in this community. And I was just thinking about the three largest park systems. Jackson County has 22,000 acres. Kansas City has, I want to say, about 10,000, and so does Johnson County. Forgive me, my numbers aren't precise. But so these systems were established with the idea of, setting aside land for the future that provides all kinds of environmental and public benefits. And so we have this longstanding ethic of stewardship, right? Kansas City, Missouri, of course, is born of the City Beautiful movement with the Parks and Boulevard system. And so it's timely to ask, how do we begin to embed this ethic of stewardship in ways that are practical and cost effective and aligned with our different policy and planning directions so we can begin to have cleaner air and reduce flood risks and higher quality habitat and all the rest. So I'm going to stop there. Our agenda for today is our guest Steve Apfelbaum will speak for, I don't know, somewhere between 40, 45 minutes, something like that, and we'll have time for a couple of questions. Steve comes from southern Wisconsin and is really a global thought leader in the practice of ecosystem restoration, certainly has extraordinary experience with the topic of riparian work specifically, but he's been involved in large-scale restoration projects in biomes across the world and brings a deep knowledge both of research practice and field practice and figuring out how to get stuff done. He's a longtime friend, and I'm just thrilled that he was able to come down from Wisconsin. After he speaks, then Logan Healy will take some roughly equal amount of time, and he's going to. Logan is the executive director of the Heartland Conservation Alliance, and the HCA is leading a $5 million effort to restore riparian habitat and also wetlands and plant trees in upland neighborhoods in the Blue River watershed. And so it's probably the biggest riparian restoration project in the history of our metro. And so they're just starting to get their feet wet. And he's going to share what the intentions are with that program. And then after that's all done, we'll have time for like a little panel Q&A opportunities to open it up for discussion and explore anything that might be on top of mind for you. So that's the plan for today. And so, Steve, I'd like to turn it over to you. Welcome. Yeah, of course.
I'm not going to use this. Can everybody hear me if I don't use this? Good. Otherwise, I chew on them if I haven't had dessert. So what I wanted to do is give you a sense of stewardship is coming at you quickly, whether you adopt it affirmatively and embrace it or not, you're going to have to do it. So what Tom just asked was a very genuine and gentle plea and inquiry on how to engage in stewardship. The truth is, Every city in the world right now is being bombed by changing hydrology, changing water chemistry, massive changes and damages to infrastructure. This short list will give you some sense of what some of the challenges are. And every one of these, individually and together, are pointing right at the bullseye of the need for engagement and adoption, affirmatively and proactively, not passively and post facto after damages. So storm and flood intensification is occurring. How many realize how many $1 to $5 billion storm events and damages we've had in this country just in 2025? Guess how many we've had? Any guesses? It's about 30. And it used to be in the 2 to 3 events per year. And it's been going up exponentially. What does that mean? It means that the increasing flood frequency and severity, the increasing rainfall intensification or snowmelt events where I come from, we have something called snow up where I am at, you have ice, I guess, that these events are much more concentrated, which means that the time during which the event occurs is much shorter. So you'll get, tomorrow you're going to get 3 to 5 inches of rainfall an hour south of here in one day. That's not a normal rainfall event, according to about 200 years of statistics. So the watershed, the stream channels, the beds and banks, erosion of those features, water quality, declining biodiversity, invasive plant species and wildlife species, including fish that can tolerate those changing conditions. That's the trajectory that we're on in every urban area. I know of no place on the planet that's immune from this, including subtropical Amazon, tropical Amazon. This is occurring everywhere. I'm a student of Dr. Luna Leopold. I studied river physics with him and hydrology. And what I learned from him was that on Mars, the channels that suggest it was water movement and all the channels on Earth all operate under the same laws of physics. The geometry of the channels, the meander frequency, and how much they wiggle per mile, the width and depth of the channels, it's all related to discharge. And catastrophic events change the hydraulic geometry, which is a fancy term for all the wiggles and the depth and width and discharge relationships. These changes are phenomenally important to understand if you're managing land, if you're a policymaker, if you're an engineering firm that's working with stream systems. A lot of the old ways of thinking, a lot of the old floods of record, a lot of the modeled events, a 24-hour 2-inch event, now a 100-year event might be 7 or 8 inches, might be 9 inches, depending upon the region. But the real reason to embrace this is, one of the foundational reasons is the cost and the risk and damages to public and private infrastructure. It's fundamentally changing the way you drive around a city after you've had a flood. It's fundamentally changing the way that the city is going to focus, or you're privately going to focus on expending to accommodate the changes Mother Nature's throwing at us. So stewardship isn't an option, it's a necessity. How we engage with it needs to be strategic to be efficient with money. It also needs to be strategic because some of the wholesale changes it's going to deliver on our doorstep need to be factored into how we rethink the way we've designed and planned. So I won't go through the results. You know the results of these changes in nature. Increasing costs for infrastructure repair and replacement, significant increase in safety and exposure risk, loss of life, residents, wildlife, livestock, increased insurance and reinsurance. Can't even get insured in some places of the country now because of these changes. And then you add wildfire where fuel loads are so high, which is tied to the same series of physical laws. Declining land values. and increasing cost to operate the land. And this is the formula for economic failure and collapse at different scales. It's already happening in different parts of the world. Crop failures, declining production of the food we count on, and supply chain risk intensification, topsoil deterioration, declining nutrient density of food. Everything is tied together, you guys. This isn't that you can't think of this. You have to be a systems thinker to be able to understand that you're not able to solve one problem thinking independently about another problem or challenge. It really all has to be taken into account at the same time. The ecosystems of this area historically were these wonderful prairies and savannas on the bedrock, limestone bedrock features. And down in the lower areas, wet areas in the valleys, such as where some of our municipality downtowns are built, like Mission and Brush Creek through the plaza. I mean, that was a wetland area historically in a floodplain area. And it's telling us every time there's an event that it wants to return to that. And usually fighting or disagreeing with Mother Nature doesn't work real well. What we've learned about the historic landscapes of this region is that they were diverse, dynamic, productive, and stingy. Diversity means a lot of species at all levels. Dynamic means they did know how to change, and they were evolved or adapted to the changing conditions. They changed all the seeds and the plants, the turians, bulbs, the spores, everything was in the soil. So if there were a period of unusually wet years, wet plants began to flourish. If there was a period of unusual drought, dry site species prevailed on the landscape. All that is part of the insurance policy of the system. Productive means all forms of life optimize the use of photosynthetic sunlight, and plant material flourished, and all the other life on the landscape flourished as a result of that. Stingy is something that people don't understand. They confuse what little kids do when they fight over a toy. Stinginess in nature means that nature holds on to water and holds on to nutrients. And the counterpoint to that is whenever we disturb nature, that stinginess for some period of time is relinquished. So excess water coming off the landscapes, excess nutrients, soil that would normally have been kept in place. The other thing that we don't realize, because we have kind of short lifespans compared to nature, is that nature changes right in front of our eyes, and it changes routinely. And it's been on long cycles of change and then accelerated short cycles of change, such as what we're experiencing now. This is the same site photographed in, I think it was 1870, and this site in the 1990s that I took a picture with at the same camera point. Same site, bedrock outcrop in Wisconsin, and you can barely see it in the second shot. If you really want to learn how changed conditions are, look at the original land surveys from the 1830s and 1840s in this region. This is the city of Chicago, right here. Chicago River this is a square mile. The city of Chicago is the Chicago River in the city of Chicago was called a morass, a swamp, and it was a half a mile wide. And now it's about 150 to 200 feet wide in a cement lined channel. Look at some of this historic document. It's fascinating to see how it's changed. And you can even read the original land survey records that Thomas Jefferson sanctioned to do the general land survey for the whole country. It's fascinating. Ecosystems have changed. The prairie in this region historically, the average prairie in this region was about 1 million acres in size in the 1790s. All these different food web elements, the large grazers like elk and buffalo were in the center. I can't reach high enough. And then grasshoppers and moths and prairie predators. 100 years later, the average size in the 1890s of the prairie was about 1,000 acres. Most have been plowed up for agricultural land use. And then in the 1990s, the average size where I come from in Wisconsin and Illinois is less than 40 acres in size. And you can see most of the ecosystem diversity has been lost. As we lose diversity, we lose functionality. That stinginess disappears. It's the simplest way to talk about the change. This is urban Chicago flying into O'Hare Airport. And this is where I live, where a lot of your cheese and sausage, bratwurst, and good beer comes from in Wisconsin. It's gorgeous landscape, but the stinginess at those two scales on those two landscapes is largely gone, even in the beautiful agricultural landscape. This is the Mississippi River. We've had 9 100 to 500 year flood events in the past 15 years. This is in flood stage. This is what's happening to the ecosystems. Highly diverse wet prairies, sedge meadows along the stream have converted to monocultures or simple polycultures. This is hybrid cattail, type of glauca, and this is the green grass is Southeast Asian reed canary grass. These grasses are following every one of your waterways here in response to the changing hydraulics of the stream and the nutrient loading. The oak savannas of yesteryear that used to border every one of your rivers here, down in the floodplain areas, there were forested floodplain areas, but all the upland areas were beautiful, big bur oak and white oak trees. And what's happened is invasive shrubs, European buckthorn, Tartarian honeysuckle, Mackey's and Bebb's honeysuckle, Japanese honeysuckle, and the list goes on. Privet and other invasives have come in. And beneath that understory is the dead zone. And what we published in the 70s was the diverse savannas along the waterways in the US, primarily Midwest. When the buckthorn came in, the oaks themselves were dropping acorns into that dense shade. The acorns were not, they had inadequate quality and quantity of life, and the little baby oaks were dying. That changed to a monoculture or a simple polyculture of invasive species was followed by the birds. Bird species diversity went from about 20 breeding bird species in these high quality savannas and forests down to about 4 breeding bird species with the collapse of the system. So our quality of life, if you love birds, if you love butterflies, if you love the sound of birds on a Saturday morning when the lawnmowers are turned off, you know, we're starting to lose that. It's directly related to the lack of stewardship of these systems that used to border the riparian systems and the larger forested systems. Here's the interesting thing, just to give you some sense of how profound the changes are in the stream itself. This is Asheville, North Carolina, and this is a stream called Cane Creek. I'm going to weave a couple of examples together here. This is the year 1900. Every dot you see was a building that we digitized from old aerial photographs. And in this case, we actually used old plat maps because it was before photographs were available. Hopefully you don't see a lot of buildings there, not a lot of dots, right? This is the same map we created in 2012. Hopefully you got your glasses on, you can see there's a lot more blue dots. In fact, there's hundreds of thousands of blue dots now. This is what Cane Creek in that same location looks like in the year we did this mapping. So it's entrenched 20 to 30 feet. The stormwater infrastructure is blown out. You know, they've been dumping concrete over the bank to try to keep the neighbors' homes from washing in. These are phenomenal, fundamental changes, and it's only intensifying now. This just tells that story from the pre-settlement prairies, savannas, wetlands through the agricultural process, through suburban and urban, and the ecological, symbolic ecological change, the cattail example I used. So, this slide's corrupted for some reason, but you'll get the idea. So this is from a 780,000 acre watershed that starts in southeastern Wisconsin and goes down through Chicago region. And what we did with Luna Leopold is we studied the hydrology changes from a downstream gauge station in 1886 through 1904. There was a gauge station there, and then the USGS put in a gauge station in about 1930, or the predecessor of the USGS. So what you're looking at here is the high flows in that period of time have increased 3 to 5. The high flows have gone up several hundred times. but they've increased to 3 to 5 high flow flood events per year. The median flows have gone up 400 times in that period of time. The average is that regression line. And the low flows have gone up about 250 times in scale, in the discharge level. So, this is over a 120-year record, roughly, that gives you a sense of this particular watershed in Illinois. We've measured the same pattern of behavior on the Mississippi River. We've measured the same on the Missouri River. It's not just an Illinois thing. Sorry to say. You have some wonderful programs you've advanced. Tom mentioned a few of the things you've done, the Casey on the Map program, the stream asset inventory that was done, I think it was in the 80s, Tom, or early 90s, in that range. The county and municipal stream buffer ordinance, the model ordinances that if I heard Tom correctly, have been adopted in 14 or more communities. You have the beginning, the foundations of a jumping off point that should be really, really taken advantage of, because a lot of communities don't even start with this stuff. And having this stuff allows you to move more quickly to really putting stewardship plans together, figuring out how to engage and put the funding in place, the people in place, the training in place, and figure out what the value proposition is along the way, so communities realize that this is important and valuable, if not essential, to the future of the communities. The follow-through needed now may be beyond the protective ordinances. It really needs to focus on the maintenance and functional health of the ecological settings. The protective ordinances are paper models of a theory, but it really doesn't become engageable until you adopt it and do something on the land. There's a lot of examples of restoration operations and maintenance of stream buffers in stream, and we'll hear from Logan about an example. Ongoing training of how to restore and how to maintain is critically important. And what we've learned in the Chicago region and in Wisconsin, that there's a lot of people that want to get engaged. They want to get their feet in the water. They want to learn about the fish and how the fish are changing. They want to become personally involved in this stuff. So there's a gymnasium or multiple gymnasiums full of student wannabes that'll jump in and help at the volunteer level and at the professional level. Building a volunteer and professional core of experienced individuals to service the region is critically needed. New revenues reflecting saved costs, ecosystem service revenues, new revenues from improvements to water quality that result from restoration or can result, and then useful additional funds for O&M just to undergird the program would be essential. This is from an old slideshow. This is a book that I wrote that tells how we've done this at our scale and on hundreds of projects. And that's a book on the restoration process that a 2-volume series we did with Island Press that lays out the how-to step-by-step that we've used on probably around 20,000 projects. So I think with that, Tom, I will entertain any questions. And I did have one question for you, and there are some note cards on the table that you should find. I notice your note card is pink. Hope you're okay with that. What we'd really like to do is, as you're listening to what I've said and Q&A and to Logan, write down what you think the critical barriers to adoption of stewardship are that you've experienced or that you think might be out there. Write them down and collect from your table in one location. I think Tom was going to go and pick those up, and then we're going to pin them on the wall so that during the panel discussion, that might be a useful jumping off for discussion with you folks. So barriers to adoption. Any questions about that, or are there 2 questions related to what I've tried conveying in 20 minutes? Don't be bashful. You guys are, the blood sugar's just coming back. You're afternoon nap time.
How about new development? How do we get new development in suburban areas and how do you get them to adopt it at the beginning of their process?
Yeah, I was hoping you'd ask that. I think I have a show on that at the end here. So what we've done is we've done what we call conservation communities. If you write one name down, write down Prairie Crossing in Grays Lake, Illinois. On that project, we eliminated all storm sewers. We have put in about 70% of the developable land into an open space system that's protected, fully endowed and restored prairie and wetland and savanna, open space trails and large park systems for people, and magnificent wildlife habitat. That project used what we have published and it's been broadly adopted all over the world now, called a stormwater treatment train, by reducing imperviousness, narrowing roads from 24 to 27 foot curb face to curb face down to 14-foot one ways and 22-foot two ways with parking on both sides of the street, really reducing imperviousness, making lots smaller and densifying the developments. We've been able to create massive open space areas. And those areas are part of the open space system you can read about at Prairie Crossing. I'll show you Prairie Crossing in a second. And if I don't, I can send it to Tom and he can share it with you. We reduced the 100-year storm event peak by 60% in Prairie Crossing with no detention, none of the standard engineering protocols. We needed 78 variances to do Prairie Crossing. We did it in 1992, and it was focused on bringing ecological solutions to the fore and not necessarily doing away with engineering solutions, because engineers, we all work together and we designed the program. Here's another example in a community right upstream of the community that was experiencing significant flooding, where they built major reservoirs to with pump storage to try to protect the communities. That wasn't working real well. It was doing peak shaving, but it wasn't really reducing the volume of water. So a group of us bought 56 acres upstream of a community, and we made it into a park, and it was all cropland, and it was all floodplain that had been ditched and tiled and was contributing to the downstream flooding. We made it into a park that's called Otter Creek Park. There's an aerial view of it. The farmer over about 100 years had filled in the low spots, and we went back with the bulldozers and exhumed them, put a parking lot in, put a couple of miles of trail in, planted it all the prairies and wetland, and here's the bulldozing and backhoe work to exhume. It's the trails. We planted it with about 130 native species, and we took a dike that was between the property and the river. We took it out, and the water immediately came in, and the stream bank itself was highly eroded, 8 and 10 foot exposed cut banks. We did brush layering, a bioengineering technique where we used the live cut stems of native willow and dogwood wetland shrubs, cut stair step benches into the bank from below the water line up to 10 or 12 foot height, and packed those with the living cut stems. And then without removing any soil, we backfilled those benches. So there was no removal of soil. And that's immediately after the construction. And just for scale, you're looking at, I think, a D8 dozer, if I recall. And you can see with the roll cage, how big those are. That's what it looked like 3 months later. And the only instability has been created by a damn beaver that loves the willow saplings and climbs up there and eats willow saplings and slides down the bank. But other than that, and all that does is regenerate the willow, it resuckers. So $56 a lineal foot all in to do this. And a normal steel pylon, steel prices have gone up, so this isn't going to be correct. But steel pylon, sheet pylon, hardened walls, usually $2,000 to $3,000 a lineal foot at the pre-tariff prices. I don't know what it is now. So we did about 80 miles of this in Chicago and in other places. The Red River of the North in Minnesota, big agricultural area. It's about 4,000 miles of this sort of treatment that have been started. So it's a very inexpensive habitat, water quality, flood managing solution. This is what the wetland looked like at Otter Creek wetland after about 6 years. Rare species from Lake Michigan, Caspian terns, a bird that people thought only nested on the Great Lakes and big rivers. It's now using this site. It flies 25 miles to get from the lake to the site to feed, which suggests something about it having being starved for preferred habitat. Great place for people. About 80,000 school kids go through this or have gone through it on a normal year. And I think I'm getting into Logan's talk. Logan, I'll leave yours. Any last question? Otherwise, I'll exit stage right and Logan will come on.
Hello, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Logan Healy. I'm Executive Director of Heartland Conservation Alliance. I've got my colleague Damon here as well from HCA. I also serve as a city council member in Overland Park, Kansas. So want to thank each of you for the public service that you do in your cities and communities every day. It means a lot, and you're doing a lot of great work out there. Heartland Conservation Alliance, we've been around since 2012. We were formed because the Blue River watershed, which we're just outside of right here, covers 2 states and covers a couple dozen different jurisdictions. So it's sometimes can be a no person's land when it comes to governance and trying to get things done for the benefit of the entire watershed, not just bits and pieces. So HCA was founded to try to serve the entire watershed. The project that we're talking about today is actually American Rescue Plan Act funded. So that was passed back in 2021, I think, just as President Biden was coming to office. And Missouri Department of Natural Resources put out a request for proposals for stormwater projects across the state of Missouri. We were ultimately, I believe, out of dozens and dozens of projects that they funded, the only nature-based project that they funded. Most of them were gray infrastructure as opposed to green infrastructure. $5 million was awarded to the city of Kansas City, Missouri for this project. Bridging the Gap, Heartland Conservation Alliance, Deep Roots, and Mid-America Regional Council did a lot of the compiling and writing of the funding application with the support of the city of Kansas City, Missouri, and it had to be a municipality that applied, so they're the ones that ended up applying. Renew the Blue has been around for more than a decade now. All these partners that you see here are members. Several of your communities are also participants in that. Just overall marketing campaign to try to bring more awareness to the Blue River watershed. And that's also the umbrella in which we're doing this project. HCA's mission, I kind of talked about where our focus is the Blue River watershed for both the benefit of people and for nature. And I did want to mention you can kayak on the Blue River. There's one boat ramp, 43 miles. There's one boat ramp that Jackson County owns. MD, Missouri Department of Conservation, helped to fund to put it in. But we do at least one kayak trip a year from that boat ramp. 131st and Holmes, so not too far from anybody. We also, HCA serves as the EPA designated ambassador, Blue River ambassador for the Urban Waters Federal Partnership Program. Renew the Blue is an effort from that. The idea there is to get the federal agencies that have an interest in urban waterways to work better together, and then also have the local ambassadors working with those federal agencies, but also the various different local government agencies and nonprofit and business groups that have an interest in those waterways. Here's a depiction of the watershed, Blue River watershed. Brush Creek, Indian Creek, Tomahawk Creek, Coffee Creek, Wolf Creek, all are tributaries into the Blue River, which basically flows 43 miles from about the Overland Park Arboretum into the Missouri River. But basically the eastern half of Johnson County is in the Blue River watershed, and most of Kansas City, Missouri, that's south of the Missouri River, is in the Blue River watershed. 2/3 of the metro stormwater drains in this watershed, and it's the most populated watershed in the metro. HCA and partners, we do a Blue River report card. We're about to publish our third rendition of that. Overall, Blue River watershed gets a C grade. So could be worse, definitely could be a lot better. I like to say we're a city of champions. And so a C, I don't think is where we want to be. But the report card looks at a lot of different categories, not just water quality. We do look at water quality, but we're also looking at recreation, habitat, governance, development, and community connections. We are making some improvements when it comes to water quality, governance, and community connections. Some more marginal than others, but habitat and development are definitely worsening, particularly as the headwaters, which are here in the south part of the watershed, get more and more developed. So with the ARPA project is what I'll call it. There are a number of different partners that I listed here, each kind of with their own little piece. Look, I think my screen here that's showing me is covering up Mark's logo there in the bottom right. This is what we're doing right now is part of their deliverables when it comes to policy and practice. The APWA standards also are part of that, developing different trainings and engaging with different folks on riparian restoration is a part of their deliverables. Bridging the Gap, we've got Sarah Crowder here, I know. They're planting a whole lot of trees and neighborhoods as part of this project. Really an extension of a lot of the great work they already do with Heartland Tree Alliance. So this funding was certainly capacity building, trying to build up some of our local environmental nonprofits. So this has been a way to expand Bridging the Gap and Heartland Tree Alliance's existing efforts. Same thing with Bridging the Gap's Casey Wildlands program. So they're going to be working in a southern zone along the Blue River in Minor Park, Alex George Wetland, and the Blue River Glades Natural Area, which are areas that they have already done work in before. This allows them to do even more. And then I'll mostly be talking today about what Heartland Conservation Alliance is doing. We're working in a northern zone. It's 5 miles along the Blue River and up to 140 acres of habitat. Here is a map, pretty zoomed out, but the northern section where that purple line is where HCA is going to be working. Those 3 dark green sections further down are where Bridging the Gap Casey Wildlands is going to be working. You can see just to the right of the purple line area is Truman Sports Complex, if that gives you a little bit of a geographic idea there. And the neighborhood tree planting is mostly going to be focused by Bridging the Gap, also in that northern section as well. So a lot of the goals of this project are the same as what Steve was talking about: improving water quality, reducing stormwater runoff, lower flood risk, mitigate urban heat island effects, and increasing biodiversity. So remember that this was MDNR funding for a stormwater project. So certainly our first and foremost priority is stormwater. But the great thing about green infrastructure is it comes with a lot of great co-benefits. We also have a huge community engagement component of this. You know, this is, as Tom mentioned, the largest nature-based riparian or streamway project in our metro's history. So we are doing some learning and experimenting ourselves. We're also trying to do a lot of community engagement and contractor engagement to try to build that ecosystem of not just public support, but also contractor experience and availability. Mark is working on a lot of the policies and tools for long-term green infrastructure success. And we're trying our best to keep all the different policymakers and decision makers informed about our progress as well. And we'll get into that a little bit further. So there's a number of guiding plans and reports. I've heard that the Blue River watershed is the most studied watershed in the nation, which, looking at a bibliography of something we did recently, I think is probably true. There's a lot of historic flooding in this corridor that we'll get into in a little bit, but there's a number of plans there listed on the right and there's even more that I could point towards of great planning that's been done in the Blue River. Sometimes the funding and implementation has lagged behind. So back in the day, Lake of the Ozarks didn't exist. People also didn't have cars in the era that I'm talking about, so they couldn't make it very far on a horse and buggy. So they went to recreate at the Blue River. Actually, in the portion of the Blue River that's now concrete channelized. So I'm talking about Independence Avenue, where it crosses over the Blue River. Lewis and Clark, we think, are who first named the river. Now, Blue River is not necessarily a unique name. It's often confused with the Little Blue watershed, which is immediately east of the Blue River watershed in Jackson County. There's also a Big Blue and a Little Blue in north central Kansas. And I mean, you know, blue with a river, you know, there's going to be a lot of those. But Lewis and Clark did call it Blue Water River in 1804 in one of their diaries as they were coming through what's now the Kansas City area. On the right, you'll see some great historical photos that we do have of the houseboats and recreation that was happening along the Blue River about 100 years ago, before we started more intentionally flushing our toilets literally into the Blue River. Industrial growth in Blue River Valley meant a lot of manufacturing and commercialization coming to the area, even though it did remain a great spot for recreation. Tom mentioned the City Beautiful movement. Blue River was a key part of the vision that George Kessler and others had, Harry Truman even, for a great parkway along our natural resources such as the Blue River. But by 1920, it was called polluted, neglected, and called a stagnant little stream poisoned by sewers. There's been a number of quote unquote flood control projects done. A lot of channelization. You can see the comparison here of what it used to look like in 1900 and then 2025, the more channelized area as the development and particularly the industry experienced multiple floods during that time. The project area that HCA is focusing on is south downstream of upstream of the concrete channelized portion of which is at the very lower part of the Blue River. We are still in a channelized area, but it remains vegetated. So the Army Corps did do a channelization project in our area. It was vegetated, but currently it's basically mowed grass. Well, grass would be a generous term, mowed invasive plant species, basically. We do have to follow, though, the Army Corps' Blue River Channel Operation and Maintenance Manual. So that's something that we're trying to stay within, but there's also pieces of that it'd be nice to come out of this project and work with the Army Corps on updating that with more modern best practices. But like I mentioned, we're in an area that is channelized, but it is vegetated. And essentially we're working from 23rd Street to 53rd Street, if that helps you. Here's a look at the current land use. So the industrial, if you're looking on the right, industrial is the purple, residential is the yellow, green is parkland. And if you're looking on the middle one, land cover shows development from low density to high density. So the darker the red, the more intense development is. Blue River is a very interesting river for a number of reasons, but certainly as you go upstream towards the headwaters, there's less development. And really you can see what I like to say is the history of our metro through here. I mean, in the very lower part, it's heavy industrial, heavy development. And then you can kind of see as we got more suburban, and there's still a little bit of rural, but that's quickly becoming suburban out by the Arboretum. So I mentioned some of these already, but the main goals with HCA's project, we have already collected a lot of baseline data that we can keep track of over time and see how the project is doing. Eradicating the invasive species, plant species, is going to be a very tough challenge, and then establishing those healthy riparian vegetation, and also trying to test different plant installation techniques that I'll get into. Community engagement, like I mentioned, a big part of this, and then capacity building. Part of what we were trying to do is show that this is a good way of doing things, show that we should do more of this, build up the capacity of our contractors as well as our different nonprofits that are working in this space, and just try to have this leverage future projects similar to this. So we've used a couple different techniques. We've done natural community health indexes. This is a method standard or developed by Missouri Department of Conservation. We looked at invasives versus natives prevalence, prevalence of canopy cover, and prevalence of herbaceous understory. KU Edwards campus, if you know Scott Schulte, I'm sure many of you do. He's a professor over there. He's had his students also help out with different vegetative and soil sampling plots. So we're hoping this is not just a standard green infrastructure or stormwater project. We're trying to also take an academic and community engagement approach to help, justify doing more of this in the future. Looking at that baseline data, you're probably not too surprised by the results. High prevalence of invasive plant species, clear progression of herbaceous invasive species moving from riverbank upward toward higher bank elevations. And in the riparian woodlands, sparse woodland stands primarily near Blue Valley Park, Blue River Trailhead, and heavy with invasives. On the native species that we did see, low diversity, dominance of low value natives, and then rare amounts of high value native species. Here are some of the predominant invasive species that we documented. A couple things I was thinking about that aren't really in my presentation that Steve got me thinking about are, first of all, as I think about the forests that we have in our metro, in our parkland primarily, I'm not sure that kids growing up today, or even for probably a generation or two, know what a healthy forest in our community should look like. You might remember playing in the woods around here as a kid, and you could probably actually play in the woods. But with invasive bush honeysuckle and other invasive plants that have crept into the understory, you can't really access the woods like you used to, unless you're in a managed forest, which most of our forests around here, most of our parkland is not really managed for invasive plant species. The second thing that he got me thinking about is I think we need to be more intentional about our terminology. We talk about open space, we talk about buffer, we talk about green space. But I think we need to be thinking more about, okay, is this a managed space or an unmanaged space? Is it a managed natural area or an unmanaged natural area? Because leaving a space alone is not enough anymore. Leaving a space alone is not natural. Humans messed that up decades ago. Because of how birds fly, because of how squirrels run, because of how deers move about, invasive plants spread that we've introduced from other parts of the world. So it's not enough to leave a place alone if we want it to be a natural area, because it's not going to be natural. It's going to be completely bush honeysuckle, other invasives. So if we want our communities to have natural areas, they need to be managed natural areas. It's fine to have green space because we know kids need a place to play ball or run around. So that's going to be turf grass. Okay, we understand that's what that is. But I think we just need to be intentional about as we're park planning, as we're doing natural area planning, stormwater planning, streamway planning, neighborhood planning. I think we need to be intentional about how we're phrasing things, because a lot of green space is not green in the environmental sense. A lot of open space is not open because you can't get through it because of the bush honeysuckle encroachment. So think about that in your realms. What terminology best describes your intention for that landscape and what it actually is, and what might need to be done to move from what it actually is to what you intend it to be. This is not in my slideshow. I will move on. Here are some restoration methods that we're working on. Mechanical, handheld tools, compact machinery, cutting, pulling, burning, though permits are required for that, but we're hoping some contractors decide to do some burning, piling or chipping. We're talking about some pretty difficult access areas here. Damon has done some fantastic work attempting to piece together the access, but some of these are pretty difficult to access, even though they're in the heart of the city. And so you're talking about long, large areas. So machinery is going to be needed. Also chemical methods, and obviously being near a riparian area, we're going to have to do some special techniques and follow best practice. But you can't really manage invasive species without herbicide. The scale of the problem is just way too big. Had we started 50, 60, 75 years ago, maybe we could have done it all natural. But herbicide is essential for invasive species management. So some of these techniques, fogging, misting, backpack spraying, using an A or UTV or other equipment to get the access that we need. So also for when it comes to planting, number of different techniques that might be used. Broadcast seeding, which is probably something a lot of folks are familiar with. Drill seeding, and then also plugging. So drill seeding sounds similar to what you're probably envisioning, but you're drilling into the soil and planting the seed. And then plugging, those are, instead of using seed, you're using sprouts of different plants. Tree planting method, we're wanting to test out a pretty cool technique that the Kansas Forest Service developed that I'm hoping a video here will work on, but it's high density direct seeding. There's also bare root saplings that we're planning to utilize, and then 3-gallon size trees. So I'm going to see if this video works, but you can see here, this is the Kansas Forest Service direct seeding method. And they've got an apparatus here that you can pull with a tractor, or potentially could use an A or UTV as well. We'll see if this works. And then, let's see. So with this method, you're going to get a lot of trees planted, and not all of them are going to survive. But you're going to. So this is an example of a place where they did this method, and I think they're interested in just the survivability rate, and also that method being easier in some areas, to try to get a really established stand of trees quickly. But obviously you need, to be able to access that site with that type of equipment, you need enough seed to do that, which that can be a challenge sometimes, depending on our local seed providers. But the idea is that if you're trying to get that tree stand set up, you're gonna lose a lot as you're planting bare roots or really any type of method. And so this might be one that you'll get more success out of. So what HCA is doing is we're basically serving as a general contractor for a number of subcontractors to do this work, because our piece in the northern section is to try to build up that contractor ecosystem of folks who will develop or have the experience to do this, and help you all, as you hopefully want to do these type of projects in the future, have more contractors available that have the experience, the know-how, because it's much different than a lot of other maintenance techniques or vegetation techniques that most lawn mowing companies around here are familiar with. So we've already released a request for proposals last week. We've got our submission deadline September 22nd. So if you know any contractors that you think might be interested in this, we will take lawn mowing companies. The key thing is that we want them to have an interest in developing this side of their business. I think as we build up the education amongst our municipalities and elsewhere, hopefully there's more work in this type of area for those contractors to do. But that's our method here. So if you've got anybody in mind that we should be in touch with, find myself or Damon, or this is also on HCA's website, or join renewtheblue.org. So we're seeking qualified contractors. We're hoping that some of the more experienced contractors will team up with some of the less experienced contractors We're doing some engagement in that way, again, to try to help those, especially more entrepreneurial or small business contractors get into this type of work, or at least understanding how they could do that. We are proposals must include a per acre pricing for both the initial restoration work and the follow-up maintenance and establishment costs through the 2028 growing season. We do have some requirements on here for what we want from a contractor. I'd say, from my knowledge, there's only a few that would check every single box, and their availability is probably tight. But these are some of the things that we'd love to have. Knowledge of botany and biology, natural resource management, valid Missouri pesticide applicators license, and the ability to identify natives and invasives at the species level. There's so many people who we trust with our yards and our gardens and our lawns who have no idea what plants they're looking at. And we're encouraging them to attend the trainings that Mark and the partners are putting on. But this is, again, a capacity building. We're going to give more points or preference to sort of teams where there's a more experienced working with less experienced groups. Or you could also, if you're less experienced, but you get a ecological consultant on board who can help kind of train, maybe you've got the people power and sort of general equipment know-how and whatever, but you need somebody who can help train your folks on the ecological side. That's another option. And then we'll also give preference to the teams that will work with us on volunteer work days and some of those other community engagement elements. Okay, so project timelines and milestones. Some of you probably heard American Rescue Plan Act. Don't you guys have to spend that money pretty quick? Yes, we do. So all of that money needs to be completely spent by the end of 2026. Well, how are you dealing with that? It's going to be tight. So final invoices are going to be due October 1st of next year, and HCA will need to pay those out by the end of October, so the city can close out with MDNR, and MDNR can, I don't know if they need to close out with the feds, but close out with the feds. Well, 1 year is not enough to do all this, especially if you're trying to remove invasive plants, you're trying to plant native plants, and you're wanting those native plants to be established. So what we're doing is we're going to be requiring a warranty phase through the 2028 growing season with a performance bond. So the performance bond will be our guarantee as the general contractor that the subcontractors will meet their obligations. I think I'll get to this at the next slide. What are those obligations? So this is another thing that probably would be new in some of you have maybe worked with these type of performance standards before, others maybe not. We relied on local experts, especially Johnson County Parks and Rec Natural Resource Department is fantastic. So Matt Garrett and his team, we've relied on him, but then of course other experts in the metro too for help on this. But the contractor's obligation is a 95% kill rate for all invasive stumps and resprouts. On the native plant side, it's 80% survival of native trees planted, 80% coverage of native species in the herbaceous understory. So they cannot close out with us until they meet those performance standards. So that performance bond that they'll have through the 2028 growing season, until they meet these percentages, these performance standards, they cannot close out with us. So, green infrastructure, it's a different type of project than gray infrastructure. So this is what we're trying. we'll report back on how all this goes. But from folks who have done this before in our area and elsewhere, these are the type of metrics that they suggested. So on our side, we will be inspecting the sites. Issues must be corrected within 30 days. And if the standards are not achieved, work must continue past 2028 until these rates are met. So we released our RFP on August 22nd. We've got a deadline for contractor questions. We've got a deadline for our response to those questions. And then the proposals are due September 22nd. You're welcome to take a QR of that proposal if you want it for your reference, or to send it to a contractor that you think does good work. You can also, there's another QR and a URL there for the link on the Join Renew the Blue website about the project to learn more about what HCA is doing, and also all the other partners that are involved. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Tom.
Before we transition to the panel, I wonder if there are any just quick questions for Logan about his presentation.
Yeah.
What is the success rate for that high density seed planting to do that, guys?
That is a good question. Damon, Andy mentioned that this was a typical success rate for the high density.
Yeah. He didn't really talk exactly about a percentage rate, but I think the concept was to plant a lot of seed. So with the intention of knowing many of them will not survive, but he planted so many that the goal was a dense stand. So from that perspective, every time he used it, it's been a success. Those pictures that you see, the goal was to mimic a natural woodland using seed, that technique. So those pictures we saw was from using direct seeding. I think some of those were 15, 25 years ago, which is pretty, a short time to get that dense type of woodland. I hope that answers that.
I think you said you dropped one seed per foot.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's
A lot.
Yeah, Larry mentioned the Kansas Forest Service Forester. That method is one seed per foot, which, trees don't grow that closely together. But hopefully you get enough to strive. And if you want more information, because again, this is the Kansas Forest Service practice that we're going to do a demo project of as part of this project, I'd be happy to connect you with Andy at the Forest Service. Any other questions?
I have a similar question about so how many species of trees fell from the slide of the they're all the same age. How many multiple species of trees are they planting?
Damon's thinking it's 5.
Yeah. Is there, I guess I don't know enough, so I'll ask the question. Is there any drawbacks to them all being the same age? I would think there might.
That I'm not a forester. There might be another forester in this room, but if you'd like to be connected with Kansas Forest Service. Any other questions before the panel?
So Kansas City's got a long history of working on watershed management, and we've had a long interest in protecting our streamways. What do you think's in the way, and what do you think might be the first cut solution?
You've been working on it day in and day out.
Well, to the comment back there, I'm not saying this is a silver, I hate to say bullet, but silver bullet. But last couple of years, wearing my Overland Park City Council hat, we've invited the governing body to do an invasive species removal at the Overland Park Arboretum. So, getting folks hands-on, getting decision makers hands-on with the problem. When you get out there and you're, and
pulling or cutting honeysuckle and trying, you realize volunteers aren't gonna get this done. We gotta pay some contractors, we gotta invest some money, we gotta hire staff to do that. So yeah, I think it's education of decision makers. Having examples, I think, helps that people can come and see. I live pretty close to the Shawnee Mission Center for Academic Achievement. They've got a great wetland prairie area right in our neighborhood. I think that's a great example of what our parking lots could and should be. It's right down the street if you want to stop by on your way out of here. There's other examples. Johnson County Parks does a great job of managing hundreds and hundreds and thousands of acres. So we've got some really great examples of what this could look like. So I do think it does come down to decision maker education, and then they need to translate that into funding. That's what everything needs, of course. But I think with riparian restoration in particular, there's a really cool synergy that can happen between the stormwater public works folks, the parks and recreation folks, and the planning department, which, usually there may or may not be overlap in those areas. But that's one way to consider funding it, is maybe it's not fully funded out of the stormwater budget, or not just fully funded out of the parks department budget. But there's kind of a mix there. And then on the planning side, there's requiring or encouraging the private sector to do these things. And when we think about contractor experience and availability, the more that we're encouraging or requiring more people, not just our municipalities, but the private sector too, to do better green infrastructure and riparian restoration work, then the contractor availability is going to be better. But it also takes the folks on the enforcement side to actually enforce it. So probably the low hanging fruit, if there is any, would be enforcing what's on your books already to the full extent. Because I think if you look around your municipalities, every one of those developments out there in your community has a landscape plan that's on file that is supposed to be maintained forever. And how proactive is your city at making sure that a tree didn't die 15 years ago and then wasn't replaced? Or how proactive are you with the streamways that your planning department and planning commission required to be restored and maintained? Are you enforcing that? So, that might be the low hanging fruit, is just making sure that you're enforcing what's already on your books to the full extent, and then working with your decision makers to try to get more money towards the management, having them understand all the different co-benefits for people and for nature that come with having healthy natural areas.
I'm going to back up a step. I think that what usually happens when you're under duress of a grant timeline is, and I'm not suggesting you've done this, people don't back up and really take a look at the history and look at what these systems were like historically and how we can emulate those systems. So, for example, is there a shared vision in this region of what these systems should look like, how they should behave, what their diversity would be like, how they're to function? Once there's a shared vision, and I think there's two tracks there, and they're somewhat parallel, although they might go at different rates. One is municipality by municipality, or a private property by private property vision with all the tools. That's a different toolkit to work at those levels. Talk about some of the details. But I think at the same time, you need a regional vision. You really need to understand what the end game is here at scale, and need to understand the value proposition of what managing for the end game is. Is it Is it significantly reduced runoff? Is it, a 20% reduction in infrastructure damages for repair costs? Is it a sustainability scale value proposition or a regenerative value proposition for the city? I think some of that needs to be framed. And then within those two pathways, there's pilot projects, there's low hanging fruit, there's Blue River pilot projects. And those begin experimenting and learning. Most of these riparian systems were dominated by Virginia wild rye and other native grasses. They were not dominated at the ground story by trees, and they were certainly not covered by bare ground like they are now under the invasives. And even under native overstock, we stopped wildfires, we stopped elk and bison for producing. They don't hang out here anymore. And those are the animals that maintain along with fire, that maintain these systems and maintain the ground story and maintain shrub layers and maintain tree regeneration. So figuring out how we can emulate that history and put us on a trajectory so that we're not reinventing everything. We're springboarding off of how nature worked historically, trying to plug in to that pattern, that process, the dynamic. That's what those two pathways can allow. And in terms of scale differences, you can manage hundreds of thousands of acres at a very small cost per acre once you know you've got that scale to operate at. On one project in the West that I was on last week in South Dakota, it's 400 miles of river that's really in trouble, flooding in the metropolitan areas. The farmers are coming out of the woodwork to work on it. They're losing farm ground. So participatory learning and participatory solutions and incentivizing the innovation by people that know how to get shit done. Farmers know how to get shit done. Excuse my French, that's a word from Wisconsin that we use a lot. Really put these people to work and figure out how to compensate them is what we've done at scale. And for urban areas, we've set out pilot projects and a lot of participatory learning projects from the volunteer stuff you saw in Chicago. The volunteer stuff can't operate. It can operate at scale, but it's very selective in what you can count on it getting done. If you need native seed collection, for example, for the Senna rhododendron, woodreed in Savannah, Virginia wild rye seed, or bottlebrush grass, or bluebells, or whatever it is, or pawpaws, they can collect that stuff pretty well. It won't be necessarily delivered the way it might want it to delivered, but you'll get it. It might be rotted in the case of pawpaw. But put these people together, they have, they get passionate about seed collecting. You'll create monsters, armies that just go after pawpaws, monsters that just go after walnut, pecan seed, and figure out how to engage those passions, because there are a lot of passionate people that are looking for things like this to do, and they realize they can do something like this and it becomes meaningful to them in their lives and their family. So I don't know if that helps at all, but and there's all sorts of tools, not enough time here to get engage the tools. That tree planting device that we saw, we have a device, we have a thing called a manure spreader that farmers have, and we've done direct seeding of about 40 species of trees in some projects right out the end of a new manure spreader. And within 5 years, we have a closed canopy picking. And there's nothing, Johnson grass won't survive in the understory. So planting in rows is not the strategy that we've used. It's the strategy if you have a forestry background and you're used to trying to set up plantations of trees. So there's trade-offs, but it really comes down to the end game. What are you trying to do? You're trying to shade suppress colonizing invasives like Limaster mactii, or the whatever you guys call bush honeysuckle. There's about 10 species called bush honeysuckle. The only way to suppress that is to reduce the shade below about 30% of ambient light. And the only way to stabilize soil is to have a good continuous cover of perennial native grass or spinach or another forb that'll dominate. And we don't start with trees. We start thinking about these restorations as a fine painting. As an analogy, you know, you put different layers of paint. I'm not a painter, I'm making this up. Put different layers of paint on a painting to final, you know, to create the Mona Lisa. There's not one layer of paint. The same strategy with restoration. You put the cover crop species, the annual, biennial, short-lived perennial species, and then the long-lived perennial species all seeded into that system, stabilize the soil to capture the silt from the next flood and grow right up through it rather than be buried by it. So you get real selective with the species that you use that have that ability to grow up through burial in a dynamic environment. And then we come in and we add the tree species or shrub species. Usually when the grasses and the other native plant material are installed, the wildlife will bring in, you know, a lot of the acorn, the seed-bearing, fruit-bearing trees. So, and shrubs.
So let me stop and just ask if you all have questions for either Logan or Steve. Yeah, I see some very smart people here. We got a chance to pick their brain. Yes, sir.
So Steve, you kind of talked about building the value. In a metro like ours, we have municipality on top of municipality, and all of these have different competing interests and private property owners. How do you build in such a diverse municipality-wide watershed that shared vision and understanding of the volume value? Because I mean, in my job, we have a set budget, which is nowhere near big enough to do the projects we need to do. And I mean, you've got water coming from cities upstream of us. And if they change something, so how do you build that understanding so people understand, you know, it's not just every city trying to do their thing.
Yeah.
To build that.
Can everybody hear the question? All got it back there. Building value requires a larger scale understanding of the issue. And then everybody needs to see their participation in what you're experiencing in terms of depreciating the value of your community and in the context of the larger regional scale. And then you need to see your value in what you can contribute to a solution. So for example, I think there's 190 communities in Chicago and 4 counties, 5 counties. It's not unlike
119 in 9 counties.
Yeah, it's not unlike this area. So the MARC, the mark of the region, initially called NIPSE, the Northeastern Illinois Planning, I think is what they were called. Now they have a CMAP. They convened all the municipalities, all the counties over time to develop an understanding of the stresses and the pain points. And some of those are translated into dollar value. And those were rolled up over the region to say, yeah, we got to take flooding across our region seriously, or, you know, the collapse of emerald ash borer trees seriously. You know, that there's 10 million trees in Chicago, and 8 million are green ash. What are we going to do as a region? You know, it's a $5 billion issue. What are we going to do? And I mean, working together is absolutely hard across the region. So I think that's the first thing. And the other thing that I think is just really a critical foundation is getting the empirical studies, the evaluations, getting the land appraiser community, getting the economic impact assessments of, you know, what did that flood actually cost in real dollars? What did it cost in life safety, health and safety? What did it cost in bridges that had to be, you know, replaced? When we did the stream asset inventory, when I did the first time, we and others, there were force mains hanging out over the streams. You know, they used to be buried below the streams, and now they're 10 feet above the bottom of the stream. There are really significant costs here that need to be understood. And that's that's a regional issue based on my understanding. Hope that helps.
Steve, do you want to elaborate more? I know we had a conversation about innovative financing strategies to take on projects like riparian restoration or broader ecosystem restoration projects.
Yeah, we've used every which way that we've ever been able to think of to try to finance projects like this. Not being real general, if I think projects like this. We've done a 1% real estate transaction surcharge. And I know surcharge isn't legal. I think it's in Missouri, it's not even legal to call it a surcharge. We added a 0.5% to every real estate exchange that occurred. And that generated into an endowment fund for managing projects like this, putting the money, making it available. And that's done, somebody asked about new developments. Prairie Crossing did that, 1.5%. I think there's $30 million in the endowment now, just for that project. One development, 700 acres. So the other thing we've done, and we're doing this nationally, it may work in under 90,000 acres of stream buffers. We're doing the largest soil carbon trading projects now on the planet. So we've set up an exchange called Nature's Registry, and we've written a global protocol called the Regenerative Standard, and it's being used in agricultural regenerative farming. It's being used in group grazing projects, and the farmers and ranchers, and some metropolitan landowners are now getting, it's not huge dollars, but it can be several $100s per acre per year, year on year. So some of these contracts are 30-year renewable contracts. So you multiply that. Last year we retired 1 million acres of grazing land in the West, and we're targeting about I think it's about 300 million acres. So Kansas City would be an excellent example if there was you'd have to bring the different landowner groups together and aggregate them in some way for them to where to be, make economic sense. I don't know if Kansas or Missouri have the state legislation for nutrient grading. We're doing, it's federally legislated and promulgated, but my understanding is each state has to adopt their own state legislation. So we've been working on nutrient grading. So for example, a municipality that had there was about a $7 million improvement in their sewage treatment, their sanitary treatment plant, $7 million capital investment fee. We were able to find a half dozen farmers that eliminated the use of phosphorus, and they traded and got paid by eliminating their phosphorus use by the municipalities. So the municipality then have to pay $7 million to build a new treatment plant. So literally stitching the rural and the urban areas together. And boy, that could be part of a large riparian restoration program. You know, you can tie all these things together. In fact, one of the big projects that one little municipality did, they needed, I don't remember what they needed in the way of phosphorus reduction per year to be compliant with the new state and federal requirements. They did it on a $600,000, about a half a mile, 3/4 of a mile stream restoration in ag land where it was all bare banks that heavily grazed and eroded. And they did that. They figured out the erosion rate of the existing stream bank and the phosphorus contributing to the stream that was the same stream that the sewage treatment plant discharged to. So the city paid for the $600,000, and they paid the landowner for some sort of arrangement to pay for the land forever. I don't think the city wanted, but there's all sorts of projects like that that are springing up. In watersheds where water supply is an issue, we've done a couple projects where $40,000 to $60,000 per acre foot, we've recharged the water upstream of the municipality so that the drinking water supply in the city would not be depleted, and they wouldn't have to build a $10 million or whatever cost pipeline to bring water in from Lake Michigan or from other water sources, or drill into the high volume well. There are, I'm just giving you a smorgasbord of ways that we've been involved personally, and we've watched others do the same. So creative, once you have a big vision, two arms. Once you have a big vision, you can begin looking at the revenue generation and the cost. The cost savings is one of the other things that needs to be really nailed down. What's the value of not having to improve a $90 million bridge over the river, or a $1.2 billion bridge, whatever it was. Anyways, hope that helps.
Something that comes to mind, do you mind sharing what city you're in, or? Yeah.
Liberty, sorry.
Liberty, okay. One thing that comes to mind is, Metro Green. Who here's familiar with the Metro Green Plan? Okay. So the Metro Green Plan, is housed with Mid-America Regional Council, but it is the regional greenway linkages basically plan. But it's not just a trail plan. It is a natural resource plan. It's a development plan. It's all of these things. And so I think another way to approach financing is, again, pairing the recreation with the stormwater. Because if you're building a trail along a streamway, that's not just a recreation trail, it's also a maintenance trail for your crews or whoever you're hiring to go and maintain those natural areas. Plus, if you need to go to the voters for, a sales tax, or you're asking your governing body for increasing your stormwater utility fee or something like that, half the people come for the parks and recreation, the other half come because they're worried about flood and public safety. So pairing those together for this type of work, I think, is really important. Also, if you're, having the two states is tough. And having the way water flows out of one community into another, man, I wish our jurisdictions were based on watersheds instead of just, different random lines. But that's not the world we live in. So, trying to work with your county on at least like that sort of greenway plan, that is both the recreation and the stormwater plan. That could be a way to get the revenue can be collected by the county for the benefit of the municipalities, establishing and maintaining those corridors over time. Because regionalism, give more efficiency of scale when you're trying to work up and downstream and throughout the watershed. But it certainly is tough. But, there's a lot of surveys out there that show how popular trails are in Kansas City Metro and how popular our parks are in Kansas City Metro. So I think finding a way for Public Works, Parks and Rec, and planning to work together on greenway linkages, riparian restoration is how you, enhance and sustain that ongoing support from decision makers and general public.
I might weigh in on this question of regionalism as well. I'll reflect on our recent experience developing the new stormwater engineering standards. So I believe we have 32 participating jurisdictions, Liberty is among them. And the folks from all these communities participated in monthly meetings over a period of 2 years. And my observation generally is that everybody's supportive of taking another step. And the proposal that we're putting forward takes a big step forward. It's a new approach. And I think there's broad acceptance for it, as I believe there's broad acceptance for restoring riparian areas. I've never heard anybody say, well, that's a stupid idea. But there's all this stuff in the way. talked about what's up there, right? And, you know, question of a regional vision or the local vision or the how-to, all the, what's kind of seed spreader are we using or how do we train our crews? And so there's support for taking steps, but it feels like there's a bit of hesitance. So I hope that we adopt these new standards, and I'm sure that we'll see more pilot projects around riparian restoration around the region. The question isn't if there will be any, it's how do we scale them so we'll start to see watershed-wide impacts. I'm sure that that'll happen, but the question is, how do we overcome this sort of trepidation that we feel about getting started? I know there were a lot of comments about public acceptance and education, and those things are absolutely real. But there's also, just inside of our professional community, I think there's a need to say, do this and might fail. The failing's okay. We have a direction, we do have a vision. And if we could clarify it, we could articulate it better, but there is a vision. There's a Metro Green vision. We have sustainable stormwater principles that were developed over a period of a couple of years that have a very well articulated idea about inclusive watershed management strategies that are rooted in an understanding of stewardship and thinking about risk and asset management and community and participation. We have these things. They're very clear. So we need to do better. We can update the Metro Green Plan, but better link flood risk reduction and water quality with recreational trails and habitat improvements. That I think will probably happen. But you know, it feels like as a community, we need to just get over ourselves a little bit and say, let's just give it a shot. You have an acre riparian area on Park and Liberty that's maybe trashed out, and you try something, and I don't mean to pick on you in particular. I would say that to anybody. And how do we begin to dip our toe in the water, have some experience, learn from it, and scale up from there? On the new stormwater standards, we're talking about something new, and people are unsure how this is going to work. As we're talking about a volume control-based system that would apply to, you know, redevelopment and new development or transportation projects, you know, alike. It's new, it's hard, it's challenging. And I think that we're afraid about what's this going to work, what's our liability exposure, what's, you know, how do we design when we know everything's changing in front of us. And so I think there's opportunities for a place like Mark for us to do more convening around this post, you know, adoption of 5600. There's also been thinking about the local pathway to, you know, figure out how do we get more pilots in, and then have conversations about, you know, what worked, what didn't work, and grow this whole endeavor. This trepidation is something that just mystifies me, because I've never heard anybody say riparian is a bad thing, but there's hardly any projects. So how do we get some projects when we've got all these benefits where the value proposition is so substantial? And so I'd love anybody's feedback about this, about what maybe my question is this: do you have any high value riparian restoration opportunities in your communities that you've been eyeballing and thinking about taking on?
So if I can jump in again. So we actually are looking at two corridors right now. They were residential development built in the 80s, creeks meandering through backyards, and chewing away and chewing away and chewing away. And you know, we're looking through the RFQs that we got in for like this week, and there's a lot of hard armoring, riprap, enclosement. And these kind of come back to that trepidation. I think these are just the trial and true engineering methods that get thrown at problems like that. Because it works. It's understood. But we have this golden opportunity, and that's why I'm here at this meeting today. We have this golden opportunity to try something new for this project. And just to be frank, outside of this tried and true engineering methods, I'm not too sure what would be a good fit for, you know, a creek that's running behind 40, 50 residential houses. I mean, so, you know, if you were looking at this kind of like big picture, is there something, and, you know, again, looking at that trepidation factor,
that's a good method to buy off on?
But we did the master plan for Liberty with Patty Banks and with, the folks from Chicago, like 20 years ago. And I think I know the creek, just, I guess it would be, see if my memory is hanging in there. I remember Hallmark, I remember the downtown flooding issue. And the creek was to the, I think it would be the south east, the southeast of downtown.
So that's another problem.
Oh, okay, that's what I remember.
That's one of our biggest areas.
Yeah.
Biggest issue areas. Ones we're looking at are on the northwest part of town.
Northwest part of town. On the west side of the highway?
East side of 35, south of Liberty Hospital.
Okay, okay. So, what we had suggested there was, if I, not there, but the place I was speaking of, and on some of the Hallmark Creek, was to return the grassy native understory and to reduce all the box elder and honey locust and other invasives. In what was happening, what we identified, as I recall, it's been 20 years, is that the Manning's coefficient, the resistance to flow from all of the tree cover in that whole reach was increasing the Manning's coefficient by nearly triple, if I recall. And that was slowing the rate at which water moved through that area, and allowing the flood level to build up, the flood level to build up, and then it became more erosive as part of the energy of the higher end. So we were suggesting you've got swamp white oaks and bur oaks, old growth trees, 170, 20-year old trees, and they're in all the thicket of cottonwood and silver maple. That used to be semi-open, and trying, one thing was to increase the light and thin that area out, bring back those regenerations that are not regenerating. That's what I remember to be part of that original master plan we worked on. And the understory was all native, when we were there, it was all native Virginia level rye and a number of other native grasses that would stabilize the soil. They're flushes, so plants will flat during the flood event. So they don't represent the storm flow, and they'll stabilize soil and provide, habitat value. They're actually, I know beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but a lot of the landowners love the view over the beautiful kind of light green, grassy, waist high native grass. So I don't know what it's like now. So this is me speaking 20 years after I was there, or whatever the year was. But if you were taking a look at that, it might not require a replanting, it might not require any hardening at all. It might simply require restoring the flow regime in that reach. So.
Nick with Belt Parks. We have probably about 3 miles worth of Oil Creek that's part of the South Grand Watershed Alliance. That's an area that we have multiple events like trash cleanup and honeysuckle removal, but of course it's just dropping the bucket to what we have. And that's one area while I'm here is to look at trying to get kind of a project started with that. Yeah.
I don't even know that.
Mountains on the Missouri side in the southern part of the region. It's in DeKalb County.
Okay.
Oil Creek is the Blue River watershed. Oil Creek is little Blue River watershed. Blue River.
Okay.
All with the headwaters.
A general comment I wanted to make is, how many of your municipalities have a landscape architect on your staff? City Kansas, Missouri. I know Overland Park, our Parks Department does have a landscape architect. I don't want to speak ill of engineers. I'm sure we have plenty of engineers in this room. But giving more platform to landscape architects, I think will help us look more towards nature-based solutions. And it's not to say that the engineers shouldn't be in decisions or we need to get rid of engineers in our cities. No, I'm just saying, let's increase the number of engineers and let's also have landscape architects on our staff. Or like in your case, it might be worth working with a landscape architecture firm to help you develop the RFP that then you send out to these firms, and see if that changes their responses based on how the RFP is worded and that kind of thing. But I think landscape architects are underutilized in our local governments. And I think on the private side, a lot of times, cities will require a private developer to certify their plans with a landscape architect, or require that the restoration that the city requires be certified by a landscape architect. And what ends up happening is the developer has to hire that landscape architect, and then the landscape architect feels like they can't give their honest opinion because they're paid for by the developer, and so even if we think that we're involving landscape architects in our decisions, a lot of times I think what really happens is there's a conflict of interest because we require the private developer to hire the landscape architect, and the landscape architect doesn't want to piss off who hired them. And so we're not getting the truth or the full picture of what we think we're enforcing because of those conflicts of interest. So I think that's something to be aware of in your enforcement of things. But I think also, not just in your parks departments, but in your stormwater departments, have landscape architects. If you want nature-based solutions, they're the professionals that are trained in that.
Just one to build on that. I've been teaching at the Harvard Graduate School of Design for about 12 years, so I can tell you that the best landscape architects in the world are not ecologists, and they're not engineers, nor do they necessarily know how to talk the language like a group or know the economics. So what we've done is built SWAT teams with engineers, ecologists, planners, landscape architects, and even some other disciplines like economists. And the SWAT teams have gone around to Chicago and looked at the degrees of demand and the opportunities. Same thing in the Minneapolis area. That building those teams that can have conversation across the disciplines rather than relying on any one discipline is really a critical, important thing to be aware of. I can tell you at Harvard, probably 400 landscape architects a year is what I've had exposure to from all over the world. And they know, I'll use that word shit again, they know about ornamental plants. And in some places they are learning about native plants like Kansas and Iowa State and some of the other LA schools around the country. But it really does take a team to get this right. Don't discount the value of the different brains, the different disciplines helping. And whenever we've done that, it goes faster, you get much better results than one discipline. The other thing I'll say, Tom, and this might be part of the trepidation, when I started working here in Kansas City, I think it was in the early 80s, first projects, Burns and McDonald and the B&Bs, and there was like 6 engineering firms at every meeting, and no other disciplines were represented at the initial meeting. So when we worked on the Chief Stadium and with Jeffrey Bruce and others on some of the deck, the on-structure green roofs, nobody was represented but engineers and architects. So you have a very engineering heavy culture here, and it's difficult for that community to recognize that. we all kind of grow the community we're part of. So some way to integrate and weave together these different disciplines at the regional level and make it part of the building solutions would be helpful too. The engineers of the company that I had, a 400 person company, the engineering team had a lot of trepidation about, and I'm not suggesting this is what the trepidation of the region, but within our company, the joke that I always used was the ecologists needed to get drunk and the engineers needed frontal lobotomies, and then they started communicating. And after a while, the napkins came out and solutions that were hybrid and really infused with each other's wisdom started coming to the table. So a different way to bring the cultures together. So on one project, the Red River of the North, we've been part of the flood damage mediation process. Literally, a bunch of us ecologists were thrown in a room. I think it was about 20 of us. Corps of Engineering ecologists, and then all hydrologists and engineers were in another room. For the first 6 months, nothing productive came out of any of the interaction until we went out and had beer and ribs together. Literally, it's not a Kansas City thing. It's in Crookston, North Dakota, or wherever in Minnesota. And that started building the trust between the disciplines, the language that could be shared, and people grew together, and it became a super performing team. And that's what's maybe part of the solution set here. Well, the year is particularly important.
Here's good. Here's good. Well, maybe everybody can help me thank Steve and Logan. Before with my colleague Natalie, who have a couple last things to share before we wind up.
Yeah, so you see on the slide here, I'm gonna move the way, but so we've been talking a lot about really good best practices and ways to go about doing more of these projects, get over that hesitancy, kind of get the best knowledge that we have now. Like, we're going to be learning things through this project. And so I want to encourage everyone to please fill out this survey for me. We're building kind of a, tactical best practices. How do we do this? And that goes from like the point of how do we do contracting and the actual process? What are like the good species mixes? Just kind of raising our knowledge level. And I'll be working with folks from the Johnson County Parks and Rec Department. Matt Garrett, who some of you guys may know, has been kind of like a one-person repository of information. And so it's just kind of wanting to broaden that knowledge base in the region. How can we get those smaller municipalities that might not have a whole natural resources team as their staff to be able to get started on doing just those smaller patchwork projects and thinking about even larger and beyond that. But we got to get started somewhere. And this is one way I want to hear your guys' feedback on what are the things that you need to know? What do you know already? Like, what can we compile together that's like regionally, locally specific and helpful for folks like you? So that's all I had. And I guess my final plug is we have a green stormwater infrastructure training that is for landscape contractors. It's for anybody in the private and public realm that is out there managing land now, helping them recognize what green infrastructure looks like. And when we're talking about green infrastructure versus green stormwater infrastructure, which is, a civil engineering, much more technical facility, and it requires different maintenance. So we're trying to help raise the bar there as well. So I just wanted to plug that here at the variant. But thank you all so much for coming. This is such a great group. I appreciate everyone's questions. And I think that's it. There will be a recording of this available afterwards. We'll share the slides, probably ask you about the survey again. So, yeah, thank you all for coming.